At 2 o'clock on May 15th, 1918, Private Henry Johnson of the 369th Infantry Regiment stood watch in a forward observation post 400 yards beyond the main Allied trenches in the Argonne Forest. 25 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, 130 pounds. A former railroad porter from Albany, New York, who had volunteered for a war that didn't want him. The French Lebel rifle in his hands held 3 rounds. His partner, Private Needham Roberts, occupied the position 20 feet to his left. Between them, they had 4 grenades and 2 rifles to defend a section of front line that stretched 100 yards in either direction. No reinforcements within shouting distance. No artillery support available. No flares to call for help. Just 2 black American soldiers, loaned to the French army because the United States military refused to let them fight alongside white troops, holding a piece of French soil against the German Empire. The statistics told a brutal story. The 369th had been in combat positions for 191 consecutive days, longer than any other American unit in the war. Casualties ran at 35% for soldiers holding forward observation posts. Men in Johnson's position typically survived 11 days before being killed, wounded, or relieved. This was Johnson's 23rd night on the line. If you want to see how a railroad porter from Albany became the most decorated American soldier of World War I, hit that like button. It helps us bring forgotten stories to light. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Johnson. Henry Lincoln Johnson was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in 1892. By age 15, he was working full-time. By 20, he had migrated north to Albany, New York, joining the Great Migration of black Americans seeking opportunity beyond the Jim Crow South. The North offered wages. It offered the possibility of advancement. It did not offer quality. Johnson found work as a porter with the New York Central Railroad. The job paid $30 per month, better than most positions available to black men in 1914. The work was demanding. Porters carried luggage, cleaned rail cars, served passengers, and maintained equipment. They worked 16-hour shifts, 6 days a week. White passengers expected deference. Railroad management expected perfection. Any complaint could mean termination. When the United States entered World War I in April 1917, Johnson saw opportunity. The Army was recruiting. The pay was $30 per month, the same as his railroad wages. But military service carried something the railroad could not provide: dignity. A soldier wore a uniform. A soldier defended his country. A soldier commanded respect. The reality proved different. The United States Army in 1917 operated under strict racial segregation. Black soldiers were assigned to labor battalions, denied combat training, and barred from most military occupations. The prevailing military doctrine held that black men lacked the courage, intelligence, and discipline required for frontline combat. Army Chief of Staff General Tasker Bliss stated explicitly that black soldiers should be used exclusively for manual labor. Johnson enlisted anyway. He joined the 15th New York National Guard Regiment in June 1917, one of 2,000 black volunteers who believed military service would demonstrate their worthiness for full citizenship. The regiment trained at Camp Wadsworth in South Carolina, where local authorities enforced segregation laws that forbade black soldiers from entering white establishments. The men who had volunteered to fight for America were not permitted to drink at the same water fountains as the citizens they had sworn to protect. The 15th New York shipped to France in December 1917. Upon arrival, American Expeditionary Force Commander General John Pershing faced a problem. He commanded 4 black regiments totaling 8,000 men. He refused to integrate them into white combat divisions. The French army, desperate for reinforcements after 3 years of catastrophic casualties, agreed to take them. The transfer happened in March 1918. The 15th New York became the 369th Infantry Regiment, United States Army, assigned to the French 16th Division. The French issued their soldiers Lebel rifles, Adrian helmets, and orders to defend their assigned sectors. Unlike American commanders, French officers expressed no doubts about black soldiers' capabilities. They had been fighting alongside Senegalese and Moroccan troops since 1914. Skin color mattered less than competence. Johnson and Roberts arrived at the Argonne sector on May 3, 1918. The forest had been contested ground since 1914. 4 years of combat had transformed it into a moonscape of shell craters, shattered trees, and mud. The opposing trench lines ran roughly north-south, separated by 200 to 800 yards of no man's land depending on location. German forces held the high ground. Allied forces held the lower slopes and valleys. Neither side had achieved decisive advantage. Forward observation posts served a specific tactical purpose, positioned between the main trench lines and no man's land. They provided early warning of enemy attacks. Soldiers assigned to these positions listened for movement, watched for wire-cutting parties preparing assault routes, and reported suspicious activity to headquarters. The posts were deliberately vulnerable. Heavy fortification would reveal their positions. Instead, they relied on concealment. Shallow trenches barely deep enough for 2 men, camouflaged with branches and debris. Johnson and Roberts took their position at 2100 hours on May 14th. The relief rotation called for a 6-hour watch ending at 3 o'clock on May 15th. Weather conditions were typical for the Argonne in mid-May. Temperature around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Light rain earlier in the evening. Cloud cover obscuring the moon. Visibility limited to approximately 30 yards. The sector had been quiet for 3 days. No artillery bombardments. No trench raids. No unusual activity. Intelligence reports indicated German forces opposite their position belonged to the 77th Reserve Division, veteran troops who had fought on the Eastern Front before transferring west. These were not inexperienced conscripts. They were soldiers who understood night operations. Johnson checked his equipment at regular intervals. The Lebel rifle was a reliable weapon, bolt action. 8mm caliber, effective range of 400 yards. The 3-round magazine meant he would need to reload after every 3rd shot. Roberts carried a similar rifle with 5 rounds. Between them, 8 bullets for grenades, 2 knives, and whatever determination they could muster. At 2 o'clock, Johnson heard wire cutting. The sound was distinctive. Metal snips shearing through steel wire produced a sharp, brief noise that carried clearly in still air. German raiding parties typically cut wire in preparation for assault, creating paths through the defensive barriers that protected Allied trenches. The cutting sounds came from approximately 50 yards northwest of Johnson's position. He signaled Roberts. Both men moved to alert positions, rifles ready. Standard doctrine called for observation post soldiers to report enemy activity and withdraw to main defensive lines. Johnson made a different calculation. Withdrawal would expose their position. The Germans would know the observation post was abandoned. They could advance unopposed through the gap, flanking Allied positions further down the line. The wire cutting continued for approximately 10 minutes. Johnson counted multiple snip sounds, suggesting a party of at least 6 men working to clear a significant section of barrier. The activity stopped at 2:12. Silence returned to no man's land. Then movement, footsteps in mud, multiple soldiers advancing toward the observation post. Johnson estimated at least a dozen men based on the sounds. Roberts threw the first grenade at 2:14. The explosion illuminated the scene for 3 seconds. Johnson saw German soldiers in Feldgrau uniforms, potato masher grenades in their hands, rifles slung across their backs. Close assault formation. A raiding party equipped for hand-to-hand combat. The grenade killed or wounded at least 2 attackers. The remaining Germans charged. Roberts threw a second grenade. Johnson fired his Lebel 3 times, working the bolt between shots. At least 1 German soldier fell. Then the rifle was empty. No time to reload. The Germans were 10 yards away. Johnson grabbed a 3rd grenade from the equipment pile, pulled the pin, and threw it into the advancing formation. The explosion disrupted their charge, but did not stop it. German soldiers reached the trench line. Roberts went down, struck by grenade fragments that opened wounds across his arms and shoulder. Johnson had no ammunition, no grenades, and a wounded partner who could not defend himself. The Germans had numbers, momentum, and orders to capture prisoners for interrogation. At least 4 enemy soldiers dropped into the trench. 1 grabbed Roberts, attempting to drag him toward German lines. 2 others moved on Johnson. The United States Army had not trained Henry Johnson in hand-to-hand combat. Bayonet drills were reserved for white soldiers deemed suitable for assault operations. Johnson had received no instruction in close quarters fighting. What he had was railroad porter experience, which taught men to handle heavy loads, work in confined spaces, and resolve problems without supervision. He reversed his lapel rifle and swung it like a club. The wooden stock connected with the first German soldier's head. The man dropped. Johnson swung again, targeting the second soldier. The rifle stock shattered on impact. The weapon was destroyed, reduced to metal and splinters. 3 German soldiers remained in the trench. 1 was dragging Roberts toward the parapet. 2 were advancing on Johnson with knives drawn. Behind them, more Germans were approaching the position. Johnson could hear them shouting in German, coordinating their assault. He drew his BOLO knife. The weapon was not standard Army issue. Johnson had purchased it privately, a long-bladed knife designed for cutting vegetation. The blade measured 10 inches, single-edged, heavy enough to chop through branches. In close combat, it became something else entirely. The fight that followed lasted approximately 4 minutes. German soldiers attacked in rotation, trying to overwhelm Johnson through numbers. He met them in a narrow trench where their numerical advantage counted for less. The BOLO knife worked efficiently at close range. German soldiers fell with wounds to their arms, chests, and throats. Johnson absorbed multiple injuries. Knife cuts to his hands and forearms, blunt trauma from rifle butts, grenade fragments that embedded in his legs and torso. He counted 21 separate wounds later. He ignored all of them during the fight. Roberts, despite his injuries, managed to throw the 4th and final grenade from his position on the ground. The explosion caught 2 German soldiers attempting to flank Johnson. Both went down. The attack lost momentum. The surviving German soldiers withdrew approximately 20 yards, regrouping in the darkness beyond the observation post. Johnson used a pause to check Roberts. His partner was bleeding heavily from multiple fragment wounds, but remained conscious. Survival required holding position until relief arrived or the Germans withdrew completely. Johnson had no functional weapons except the BOLO knife. His ammunition was exhausted. Every grenade had been expended. The Germans attacked again at 2:21. At least 6 soldiers charged the position simultaneously. Johnson met them at the trench entrance. The knife work continued. German soldiers fell back, bloodied and demoralized. One attacker managed to grab Roberts again, attempting to drag him over the parapet into no man's land. Johnson pursued, climbing out of the relative safety of the trench into open ground. What happened next was documented in multiple German after-action reports and Allied intelligence summaries. Johnson attacked the soldiers attempting to capture Roberts with sustained fury. The BOLO knife inflicted wounds that German medics would later describe as extreme trauma inconsistent with standard combat injuries. Johnson fought until the German raiding party abandoned their attempt to capture prisoners and withdrew completely from the engagement. By 2:27, the fight was over. 24 German soldiers had assaulted the observation post. At least 4 were dead. More than a dozen had sustained injuries ranging from minor wounds to life-threatening trauma. 0 prisoners had been taken. The raiding party withdrew toward German lines, carrying their casualties and leaving blood trails that French scouts would follow the next morning. Johnson collapsed in the trench at 2:29. He had sustained 21 documented wounds. Roberts had suffered extensive grenade fragment injuries. Both men were barely conscious when French soldiers from the 161st Division reached the position at 2:45, responding to the sounds of combat. French stretcher bearers evacuated Johnson and Roberts to a field hospital 3 miles behind the front lines. Military surgeons spent 6 hours removing grenade fragments, suturing wounds, and stabilizing both men. Johnson's injuries were cataloged. 7 knife wounds to his hands and forearms, 5 grenade fragment wounds to his legs, 4 fragment wounds to his torso, 3 blunt trauma injuries to his head and shoulders, and 2 additional wounds to his feet, where German soldiers had stomped on him during close combat. The surgeons gave Johnson a 40% probability of survival. Infection was the primary concern. Wounds sustained in trench combat typically carry contamination from mud, fabric, and organic matter. Antibiotics did not exist in 1918. Doctors relied on aggressive debridement, frequent dressing changes, and hope. Many soldiers survived the initial trauma, only to die from sepsis days later. Johnson survived. Roberts survived. By May 18th, both men were conscious and coherent enough to provide detailed accounts of the engagement. French intelligence officers documented everything: the timing of the attack, the number of German soldiers involved, the weapons used, the duration of combat. Their report reached French 4th Army headquarters by May 20th. The evidence supported the testimony. French reconnaissance patrols found the observation post destroyed, the surrounding area littered with German equipment, blood trails leading toward enemy lines, and physical evidence of sustained close combat. German wireless intercepts confirmed heavy casualties from a raiding operation in that sector. The 77th Reserve Division's daily report acknowledged unexpected resistance from Allied observation posts. Mission not accomplished, casualties significant. French military authorities recognized the engagement's significance immediately. 2 soldiers with minimal ammunition and no support had defeated a German raiding party of more than 20 veteran troops. The tactical implications were important. Properly motivated defenders could hold positions against superior numbers. The propaganda value was immense. Black American soldiers had demonstrated courage and competence that contradicted prevailing racial assumptions. The French government awarded Johnson the Croix de Guerre with Gold Palm on May 24, 1918, making him one of the first American soldiers to receive France's highest military decoration for valor. Roberts received the Croix de Guerre with Bronze Star for his actions during the same engagement. French newspapers published accounts of the battle within days. American newspapers followed, though with notable reluctance in Southern publications. General John Pershing faced an awkward situation. The most decorated American soldier in France was a black private serving under French command because American military doctrine prohibited black soldiers from combat assignments. Pershing's response was measured. He acknowledged Johnson's valor in official correspondence, but made no moves to integrate black soldiers into American combat units. The segregation policies remained in force. Henry Johnson returned to the United States in February 1919. He arrived in New York aboard a troop ship carrying 3,000 soldiers, most of them white, most of them celebrated as heroes. Johnson's reception was different. The 369th Infantry Regiment, now nicknamed the Harlem Hellfighters, marched up Fifth Avenue on February 17th in a parade attended by thousands of New Yorkers. Johnson marched despite his injuries, which had left him partially disabled and in chronic pain. The parade route ended in Harlem. White New York celebrated the victory. Black New York celebrated the men who had fought despite being denied equal status in the country they defended. The celebration lasted one day. By February 18th, the reality of peacetime America reasserted itself. Jim Crow laws remained in force throughout the South. Segregation continued in the North. Black veterans wearing their uniforms were assaulted in multiple cities by whites who viewed their military service as threatening to racial hierarchies. Johnson struggled to adapt to civilian life. His injuries prevented him from returning to railroad work. The physical demands of carrying luggage and serving passengers exceeded his medical capabilities. The Department of War denied his disability claim, arguing that his wounds were not severe enough to warrant compensation. No pension, no medical support, no acknowledgement of service beyond the medals he had earned in France. He attempted to capitalize on his fame. Speaking engagements paid small fees. Johnson traveled to cities across the Northeast, describing his experiences to audiences who were curious about the war. The bookings dried up by late 1919. America was moving on. The public wanted to forget the war, not remember through the testimony of a black soldier who had fought for a country that still denied him basic civil rights. Financial problems followed. Johnson could not maintain stable employment. His medical condition deteriorated. Chronic pain from his injuries led him to alcohol, which provided temporary relief at the cost of long-term health. By 1925, he was destitute, living in Albany and dependent on support from friends and family. The Department of War continued to deny his disability claims through the 1920s. The logic was bureaucratic and cruel. Johnson's service record showed he had been wounded in combat, but the severity of those wounds did not meet the threshold for permanent disability compensation. The fact that he could not work was irrelevant to the administrative process. Henry Johnson died on July 1st, 1929, at Albany City Hospital. The cause of death was listed as myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle, likely related to untreated infections from his war wounds. He was 36 years old. He died in poverty. He died in obscurity. The man France had celebrated as a hero died in a country that had forgotten his service. The funeral was small. Family attended. Some veterans from the 369th made the journey to Albany. No government officials. No military honors. No recognition from a nation he had fought to defend. Johnson was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, but only after his family borrowed money to transport his body to Washington. The headstone was standard issue. Name, rank, unit, dates. Nothing about the Croix de Guerre. Nothing about the night in the Argonne when he had fought 24 German soldiers and won. For 86 years, Henry Johnson's service remained largely forgotten. The 369th Infantry Regiment's achievements were documented in military histories, but individual soldiers received little attention. Johnson's story survived primarily through veterans' accounts and African-American newspapers that had covered the war when white publications ignored black soldiers' contributions. The process of recognition began slowly. In 1996, the Department of Defense reviewed Johnson's service record as part of a broader examination of minority veterans who may have been denied appropriate decorations due to racial discrimination. The evidence was clear. Johnson's actions on May 15, 1918, met every criterion for the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. The award had been denied in 1918 not because his actions were insufficient, but because the Army's recommendation process systematically excluded black soldiers from consideration for top honors. The bureaucratic obstacles were significant. Military decorations typically require eyewitness testimony from superior officers. Johnson's commanding officers in 1918 had been French, and their reports were filed in French military archives. The United States Army had not maintained comprehensive records of Johnson's service because he had fought under foreign command. Reconstruction of the evidence required cooperation between American and French military historians. The work took years. Researchers located French military reports, German unit diaries that corroborated the engagement, medical records documenting Johnson's injuries, and testimony from surviving members of the 369th Infantry Regiment. The evidence package was compiled and submitted to the Department of Defense in 2001. The review process continued for 14 more years. Multiple committees examined the evidence. Legal questions arose about whether medals could be awarded posthumously for actions that had occurred more than 80 years prior. Precedents were studied. Regulations were interpreted. Bureaucracy moved at its characteristic pace. On June 2, 2015, President Barack Obama presented the Medal of Honor to the family of Henry Johnson at a White House ceremony. Command Sergeant Major Lewis Wilson, Johnson's closest living relative, accepted the medal on behalf of the soldier who had died 86 years earlier. The citation read in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." The recognition came too late to help Johnson. It came too late to provide him with the disability compensation he had needed. It came too late to prevent his death in poverty. But it served a different purpose. Acknowledgement that his service mattered, that his sacrifice deserved remembrance, that the nation he had fought for finally recognized what he had given. The National Purple Heart Hall of Honor in New Windsor, New York, includes Henry Johnson in its registry of wounded soldiers. The exhibit describes his 21 combat wounds and his 4-minute fight against overwhelming odds. Visitors can read his story, examine reproductions of his medals, and understand the context of his service. The Albany Public Library maintains a collection of Johnson's papers, photographs, and military records. Researchers studying African American military history regularly consult the archives. Johnson's experience illuminates the broader story of black soldiers who fought in a segregated military, serving a country that denied them equal rights. The 369th Infantry Regiment continues to exist as a New York National Guard unit. Its headquarters in Harlem includes a museum dedicated to the unit's history. Johnson features prominently in the exhibits. Modern soldiers in the unit learn about the porter from Albany, who became one of America's most decorated warriors. France never forgot. The Croix de Guerre awarded to Johnson in 1918 remains one of that nation's highest honors. French military historians include Johnson in their accounts of World War I, describing him as an example of courage under fire. The gratitude expressed in 1918 endured to the decades when America chose to forget. The railroad station in Albany, where Johnson once worked as a porter, now includes a historical marker describing his service. Commuters pass it daily, most without noticing. A few pausing to read about the small man who had done large things in a forest in France more than a century ago. Military training now includes Johnson's story and lessons about close combat, defensive tactics, and leadership under pressure. His decision to hold the observation post rather than withdraw. His improvisation when ammunition ran out. His protection of a wounded comrade against superior numbers. All of these elements are studied as examples of effective combat decision-making. The delay in recognition tells its own story. 86 years between the action and the Medal of Honor reflects the systematic discrimination that denied black soldiers equal treatment during and after their service. Johnson's experience was not unique. Thousands of black soldiers who served in World War I faced similar obstacles, denied decorations they had earned, denied disability compensation for injuries sustained in combat, denied the full citizenship they had fought to defend. The Henry Johnson story is not just about one soldier's bravery. It is about a nation's struggle to reconcile its stated values with its actual practices. It is about the gap between rhetoric and reality, between the promise of equality and the persistence of discrimination. It is about the cost of that gap, measured in lives like Johnson's, men who gave everything and received little in return. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this to more people who need to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We rescue these forgotten stories every day. Real people, real courage, real history that deserves to be remembered. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, France, anywhere in the world. Tell us if someone in your family served. Let us know you're here, that you care about keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Henry Johnson is not forgotten. These soldiers gave everything. The least we can do is remember their names.